Our postcard today is from one of the great castles of Great Britain. We're at Ludlow in Shropshire. I know this is an ancient medieval castle we have here, but I feel I'm standing on a film set. It looks so modern. Take us back to its early beginnings.
Yes. The first stones were laid here sometime between 1086 and 1088. That was 20 years after William the Conqueror and the Normans had arrived, and a family called the de Lacy's were in charge of this area on the Welsh border, and they chose this site for their Norman castle.
A perfect site, one would say, presumably a hump by a river.
Yes, surrounded on three sides by the River Teme, and it would have been an unsettled site, and it would have been tree covered, and a prominent position halfway between the north and the south of Wales, and just on the Welsh border, because one of the prime functions of the castle was to control the troublesome Welsh who occupied the area to the west, and which the Normans weren't particularly interested in.
So what has actually happened in this castle then? Big events?
I suppose there are three outstanding events, really. The first one happened in the late 12th century, when the ownership of the castle changed hands, and another Norman family called the Dinans took over from the Lacy's, or captured it from the Lacy's. The story goes of a gentlewoman who lived in here called Marion de Brewer, and there was a prisoner in the castle, and she became his lover, and she helped him to escape. And subsequently, when the Dinans were away from the castle, she let this lover into the castle again on a promise of marriage, but he brought his troops into the castle and recaptured it for the Lacy's, and she eventually jumped off Pendover Tower, which is up there, and committed suicide when she realised she'd been tricked. And this lovely story, possibly, perhaps, is the main feature of these Fitzwarren romances, which were stories which were recounted at the great halls and at the great parties that would have been held here. So that's one of the earliest stories connected with the castle.
Doesn't sound lovely, so much as heartbreaking.
It was, yes.
Yes. And what about kings and royalty?
Yes, the next time the castle really featured in the national scene was during the Wars of the Roses. This was a great Yorkist centre, and the fortunes ebbed and flowed between the two sides, and the Lancastrians did in fact take the town at one stage. There wasn't a great battle here, fortunately, but there was a lot of destruction in the town. But later the Yorkists at the nearby Battle of Mortimer's Cross regained control, and they came back to the castle, and the owner of the castle, who was then Edward IV, ceded the crown of England, and his two young sons, who later became known as the Princes in the Tower, he left them in charge here. And of course, when they left here on his death, expecting to become the King of England, they were very rudely killed in the Tower of London. The third event was the Civil War, when, as a great royalist centre, the town was besieged by Cromwell's troops, who were camped on the Wycliffe, just a quarter of a mile the other side of the river. And again, fortunately, there was no great battle, and the town gave in to Cromwell's troops. And that saved a lot of loss of life and a lot of loss of destruction of the buildings. There was much destruction outside the town wall, because the inhabitants fired all the buildings outside the town wall so that they could see any troops coming to take the town and pick them off more easily.
So presumably then, that's what I was going to say, everything looks so intact still.
Yes, yes.
Is that because it wasn't attacked much?
It wasn't. And remember that this castle is 900 years old, but for 600 years it was a flourishing, a centre of great activity, a great wealth here, and it was improved, and great people lived here, and great events and great banquets took place here. For 600 years it was a very flourishing centre, and it was only at the beginning of the 18th century that it ceased to have a life and gradually fell into disrepair, which was partly aided by the climate of the time, in that ruined castles were more romantic than inhabited ones, and there was no great urgency to keep it in repair, and there was no need for it anymore. And a lot of the treasures of it found their way into some of the great houses, perhaps even the Feathers Hotel, perhaps even Dinham Hall Hotel has some of the great treasures that were looted possibly by the local inhabitants when the castle ceased to have a life. And that's only 300 years ago.
Sir Henry Sidney was a very important man in this area. He was placed here at Ludlow Castle with a specific job to look after this area known as the Marches. And there were Roman Catholics specifically in Montgomeryshire that caused a lot of problems to the Queen at the time, Queen Elizabeth I. And his enemies at court were very much against the fact that he was paying out of his own pocket for modifications to this castle. And his friend at the time, Sir Francis Walsingham, wrote to him a letter and basically said, you know, there's people here at court who are seeing what you're doing, that you just want to become the Queen's favourite, and really you've got to look after your commission, his commission being quelling those Roman Catholics over the border in Wales, in the county of Montgomeryshire. Anyway, he was so upset by this whole thing that he actually had inscribed above the gateway in Latin the following: "To ungrateful men we stones do speak," because he couldn't understand why he'd done all of this out of the goodness of his heart, paid for everything, and yet the Queen didn't necessarily see him as a friend. In fact, probably saw him as a traitor. And that was his answer to her. His tomb now lies in Ludlow Church. Now show us round the castle in your inimitable style.
Thank you. We have the great hall behind us, and this would have been, particularly in Tudor times, lavishly furnished, lavishly decorated, and with great banquets. And most of the Tudor royalty will have spent a lot of time here. Catherine of Aragon, Mary Tudor will have dined and banqueted and been entertained here. And we've got to sort of try and imagine that great excitement and the busyness about the castle that was going on there. And that great hall now is used, although it has no roof on it today, it is well preserved, and it provides the backdrop to the Shakespearean plays which take place here. And the windows and the upper floors are used by the actors, and the directors integrate it into the Shakespearean productions.
And from the Great Hall we go to where?
Well, we've got the outer walls, the northern walls of the castle, and we have some of the living quarters here, and some of the very earliest ensuite bedrooms here. And if we look at the outside walls of the castle, we can see the positions for the toilets in these beautiful ensuite bedrooms known as garde-robes. They date back probably to the 13th century, and very advanced facilities really, and some of the best living facilities anywhere in the country.
And coming round to here?
Yes, we've got the castle keep here, and underneath that would be the usual dungeon areas and some of the service quarters for the castle. And then just outside the castle keep there, we've got the remains of the moat and the present day bridge which takes the visitors into the inner bailey of the castle where we're located at the moment.
And what about then as we come round to these buildings here? Is this also part of living quarters?
Yes, I think there was a laundry area there on that side of the castle keep, and just the outer walls of the inner bailey, which was the sacrosanct area.
Now, if there was a league of castles in these British islands, where would Ludlow fit? Would it be Premiership material?
I think so. Perhaps not quite the top of the Premiership. I think the great thing of Ludlow Castle is its location. I think it has a stunning location, and it's part of a stunning townscape. But it has been ruined for 300 years, but it was a very extensive, or it is a very extensive castle still, and the remains are exceedingly well preserved, but it is a ruined castle.